Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at gcnlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Everyone all set? Cocked? Locked? Here we go. Your dial set correctly to USAPrepares.com. We're delighted you're here, and we're broadcasting 2 hours from high atop the Missouri Ozark Mountains. There's a link to your instructors on the website, USAPrepares.com. I'm delighted to be broadcasting with Rich Scheben today. He left the bright New York City lights and the 24/7 supply chain to move to Montana and live off the grid, generate his own electricity via solar and at times with a generator, and hunt and fish and raise his own food. Welcome, Rich.
Well, thank you, Vance. It's always a pleasure.
Well, it's great to be with you. I miss seeing you. I miss seeing you at the farmhouse and the events we have. So, Rich, the middle class has been decimated from even before the Bush regimes and the Barack Obama regimes. But Americans feel that maybe there's a hint of potential for us to restore the middle class, maybe fix some of these egregious sins that have been forced upon us, committed by politicians and tricksters and hypesters and fraudsters and criminals. And I'm talking about people in the government and people who buy influence of people in the government, people who write bills that become laws that force us at the muzzle of a gun to do things that make no sense. Let me give you an example, and then I'd love to hear your thoughts. Back in the 80s, the Human Research Department at the bank, and that's human resources for most people, I guess. I used to call them human research because I thought they would push people to extreme limits and see how far they could push. And I believed it was kind of like research. Testing the employees. We had a thing called equal opportunity, and I didn't know what, and affirmative action, and the big one was affirmative action. And I didn't know what exactly that meant. I could understand equal opportunity, but affirmative action, I didn't know what that meant. So I went to the Human Research Department, and I asked the gal who was the head of it what it meant. And she said, well, we've got to reach out to people that might not apply for positions in the bank. I said, well, what does that mean, reach out? Well, we need to advertise. We need to seek them out and find people who just might not know about us. I said, well, like, how? Well, we need to advertise in Ebony magazine and magazines that are specific to specific races and cultures. And I couldn't understand why we just couldn't put an ad in the local city newspaper, which had plenty of people from all different walks of life, all colors, and why wouldn't that work? But why did we have to specifically target people of color? Why? Why couldn't they find us, whomever they may be? And I'm not being racist. I'm just saying, why specifically find people who don't know who we are? Why would we do that? When I applied for jobs, I would research. I'd go to the library and before the internet, research these positions, know everything I could learn about the company, so that they realized I was serious. And that's how I landed positions, good positions, because I was willing to do more research than the average bear. Rich, I think we've lost our way, and the damage has been monumental. What do you think?
Well, I'm going to answer your question by something that America has lost, in my opinion. and I talk about this in the book, and I've mentioned this in many talks, we've lost the ability, because of political correctness, information, maturity, being swayed by the mainstream media, which is their job is to manufacture perception, pity, guilt, ideology. And we need to stand for principle again. And you're not going to, we as an American people will not be able to help others. And you can see we're getting more selfish. We all are. We're all imperfect sinners. But as a society, you can't help others with government programs, especially like affirmative action and quotas, where everything has a law of diminishing returns. In other words, there's a timetable where you keep doing something and doing something and doing something and lowering the bars of standards and expectations while you're doing it. You lose appreciation and value for everybody and everything in the whole country. So the first thing regarding standing for principle, Vince, the base, every philosophy, methodology, theory starts with a base. And we have to have the same rules, laws, and accountability for everybody on American soil. You got to remember that the mainstream media, their MO, the elites, the powers that be, powers to be, powers shouldn't be, the neocons, the deep state, I don't care what you call them. It really doesn't matter. There's 8 people in the world, 8, that have the same net worth or more than half of the world combined. Okay? These people own the 6 corporations, which now might even be as little as 4, who are controlling 95% of the information, designed to sway public opinion. And they call them fake news, but they're really bought and paid for news. And that's a simple way to put it. So their MO is to distract, dumb down, and divide us by groups. If there's 2 people with a social stigma in the country, they're going to find these 2 people, and they're going to say, oh, my God, everybody is, controversial, extremist, racist, bigot, sexist, misogynist, homophobe, intolerant, violent, hater, with an anti in front of any word you can think of, or an ism, ist, or phobia on the back of any word you can think of. And that's all they do. They're against everything, especially things that built our culture, tradition, and heritage. And they've got to break down the last bastion of freedom and liberty, which is America, in order to create a global, top-down, centralized control situation where there's no accountability at the very top, especially from being governed. And they're basically immune to everything from the law and everything else, because they're pulling the apron strings from behind closed doors. So that's the first thing that we need to realize, is that we have to make sure people realize that we're not helping society by lowering the bars of standards. We have to have the same rules, laws, and accountability for everybody. To put it a different way, Vince, we need to be hated for telling the truth versus wanting. Put it a different way, we need to draw a line in the sand and have zero tolerance for political correctness. We have to put our country first. And that is, I'm not saying not to do business. We all have bills to pay. I'm saying when your first priority is to feather your own nest or have a desire for being liked or loved, then that's not putting your country first. That's not standing for principle. And I could use politicians all day long as an example. You know, they wear these $5,000 suits that come in all fit and trim, and their hair's toned, and they look so neat, and they're smiling, and they're kissing your baby. They're giving all these compliments to your face. But as soon as you turn around, you or your group gets sacrificed and gets a knife slammed in the back. And, we need to start calling a spade, because you're not going to empower a nation by lowering the bars of standards and expectations for certain groups. That is a recipe designed for a divide and conquer philosophy and methodology. It creates disrespect. It creates division. It's designed to create submission and break people's will. And I'll just give you a personal example. I know I've said this on your show many times, Vince, but when I was working for GlaxoSmithKline, I was diagnosed with spinal stenosis and nerve damage. I had a lot of muscular atrophy. Human Resources, I'll make the long story short here, Human Resources told me that part-time job shares were for women only when I had neurosurgeons right in my company and telling them that I needed to reduce my driving by 50%. It was totally irrelevant. I contacted 30 different attorneys. I consulted all over the country, even outside Montana. And they said, well, as a poor/middle-class white male heterosexual with a Christian name, the odds of you winning a reverse discrimination lawsuit is 1 out of 1,000. If you were female and it was happening to you in reverse, you'd be on the 5 o'clock news that night with a $10 million settlement. And here's my personal favorite. One attorney told me, as a poor/middle-class white male heterosexual with a Christian name, you don't have enough group self-pity points. Now, the whole system is designed to degrade, to disrespect, and to insult every minority. Because when you create chaos, when you create infighting, you have the perfect recipe for divide and conquer. When you say one group can't compete, or one group's work is suboptimal, so we have to reduce the bars of standards and expectations, you're insulting their work ethic, their ability, and their intelligence right off the bat. Then, these elites who's creating these policies are basically pointing the finger at these people who are demanding the bars of standards and expectations to be lower. And they're saying that history is going to show that these groups who are demanding these bars of standards and expectations to be lowered, and I will finish that statement on the front end after the break, man.
Rich Sheben's with us. Offgridmontana.com. Offgridmontana.com. Rich Sheben's with us. And we've been talking about the middle class and how we've been decimated and what we can do about it. Rich, please continue.
Well, thank you, Vance. Where I was is the fact that the elites are pointing the fingers indirectly at these groups who are demanding to have the bars of standards lowered for politically correct buzzwords like equality, fairness, tolerance, accountability, transparency, diversity, inclusiveness, prosperity. These words have been changed, by definition, hijacked, to use as tools, weaponized tools, to divide the American people. So when certain groups demand for decade after decade after decade to lower the bars of standards and expectations, what happens to America is that everything that made us great, ingenuity, productivity, knowledge, innovation, has been thrown out the window with the baby and the bathwater. So not only are the elite disrespecting these groups, but they're destroying our own country at the same time. So it's a win-win for the globalists because they got to break down our country to create a world currency, to create a world government, to create a top-down centralized control with no accountability, and in a lot of cases, non-elected officials. And in too many cases, if they are elected, they've been bought and paid for, just like the fake news. So what I'm going to do here, Vince, is, you know how much I love to go into tangents. I would like to talk about certain things that is going on today and tie them into how it's hurting the middle class, since you brought that up. But I first want to give kind of a semi-analogy here. And I want to talk about Tom Brady, or Brady and Belichick, the New England Patriots. I know everybody's tired of hearing about them, but I wanted a lot of hype and circumstance to chronologically wade by after the Super Bowl. And I just want to talk about this because I think it's very relevant to raising the bars of standards and expectations in America. You know, Tom Brady, and I want to say something. I grew up in the metropolitan area of New York City. I'm a Jets and Giants fan, okay? And I hated the New England Patriots, because not only were they always winning, but they're in the same division as the New York Jets. And being a Giants fan, I can guarantee you that Eli Manning and Tom Brady don't exchange Christmas cards, because we all know that Eli Manning beat Tom Brady and the Patriots twice in Super Bowls. So that being said, the reason why I rooted for Tom Brady during the Super Bowl is because I was getting so tired of America not winning. I was getting so tired of people who want to raise the bars of standards and expectations being called a controversial, extremist, racist, bigot, sexist, misogynist, homophobe, intolerant, hater, and all these politically correct buzzwords and dirty dozen words that I talk about on the air or in a talk very often. And the elites are purposely lowering the bars of standards and expectations. And too many people are falling for these divisive tricks. So I rooted for Tom Brady in the Super Bowl, even though I'm a Jet and Giant fan. Okay, because of the fact that I wanted him to win that fifth Super Bowl. He is an icon of American, Brady and Belichick, of hard work, effort, proven results, and qualifications. Where so many people, like the circumstances that happened to me with GlaxoSmithKline or the New York City Fire Department or the National Forest Service, when they told me I couldn't get a job as a white male back in the early 80s, and they hired two girls sitting in the waiting room with no experience, no education. This is what's happening in America. And it degrades and insults and disrespects all these people in this group. And when you lower the bars of standards and expectations, let's say you're a high jumper, and let's say there's, I don't know, let's say there's 100,000 people listening to this show, Vince. I don't know. Let's just say. Let's say you raise that high jump to 6 feet. How many people are 3% can make that? Let's say you lowered it to 6 inches. Everyone's going to make it. There's no qualifications anymore. And that's what we need to get back to. And I can hear the music, so I'll pick up on the other end.
We're talking about the middle class, and we're talking about what's happened to us, and we're talking about how to fix it. Rich Sheben's with us. OffGridMontana.com. OffGridMontana.com. He wrote the book, One New York Man's Journey to Off-Grid Living in Montana. Rich?
Well, thank you, Vince. And I always appreciate you allowing me to exercise my First Amendment rights on your show. Thank you. After talking about Brady and Belichick and winning and raising the bars of standards and expectations, we in the middle class aren't having that opportunity, because getting a job, keeping a job, even suing, restitution, rights, are totally dependent. If you're on the bottom 93%, it's totally dependent on what group you come from, what skin pigmentation, what gender, what sexual orientation, what religion. Any group that they can segregate us and divide us, that's what they are doing. And too many people are falling for this trick. We are allowing the elite to poison us against ourselves. I want you to think about that. And this is why we need to exercise our First Amendment rights. Millions of combat soldiers gave their lives so we can have our Constitution, our Bill of Rights, our Declaration of Independence, and freedom and liberty. And there's 4 things the middle class cannot buy back. And when I say middle class, I mean the bottom 93% of Americans, because the poor and the middle class have pretty much melded together. And I'm going to talk quite a bit about economy later in the show, just so people can see what we're up against. But the odds are not good, and we all have to read, research, and grab a microphone some way in order to get our country back. So I regress. I'm going to go into some news that's been happening over the past just few weeks and talk about how it's destroying the middle class regarding options, freedom of speech, etc. A lot of things I talk about. The first thing I want to talk about is, and this was in the news very recently, a New York assemblyman unveils a bill to suppress non-government-approved free speech. I believe his name is David Weprin. I think he's out of New York City somewhere, like Queens, which is where I was born, so it's disheartening. Anyway, the next thing I want to talk about is Google instructs contractors to flag upsetting/offensive search results. This is also very new news. This is very disturbing, folks. Just about 2 weeks ago, I had my tech guy take all of my radio/TV shows off my website. Okay, about every 5 or 10 shows I'd stick on my website so people could listen to them. And I had him replace the deletion of all the shows with these couple sentences. And I'm not going to paraphrase. I'm going to read it to you and quote it. And it says, "Please be aware." It's under news and radio, where it always said rich in the news/media. It says, "Please be aware that I will continue to do radio/TV shows, but will no longer continue to add them to my website because they are censoring and audibly changing words, phrases, or deleting segments of shows. We are now living in a real, live, virtual reality, politically correct Twilight Zone episode diluted by censorship and surveillance." Thank you, Rich Scheben. Okay? This is what we are up against, folks. And again, when I say middle class, I mean the bottom 93%. We are fast approaching, and by some people's definition, we're already there, a totalitarian, authoritarian, socialist, communist, dictatorship, top-down, centralized, corrupt, manipulative, control government. And we can't sit by and wait for Donald Trump to do it for us. And I'm going to talk about him in a minute. We all have to, again, read research, use objective facts in our arguments, and that's objective emotional opinion, and help the bottom 93%, not just to prosper, but to survive, because that's what we're heading up against. Because when you can't use logic and common sense, and it gets replaced by corruption, manipulation, nepotism, the thousands of veils and guises under political correctness, there's no hope. There's no hope for controlling your own destiny. I'm really big into nature and the outdoors. That's why I hunt, fish, live off-grid, live off the land, grow 90% of my own produce. Everything that we do here is about nature and the outdoors. And because of what happened to me in the corporate world, I really don't have a choice. But luckily, this was my goal, to live under the veils of nature. But I want to talk for a second or two about Lewis and Clark. Okay, I mentioned in the book that if I can go back to the early 1800s, I would have been on that journey. That's how much I love nature and adventure and the outdoors. Now, one thing that Lewis and Clark did is when they got to the West Coast, Lewis and Clark gave every person, doesn't matter if it was Clark's black slave or Sacagawea, the Indian female, they gave them a vote, and they wanted every person to say what they think regarding a campsite on where they were going to be at the Pacific Ocean. Now here, we're allowing people to yell, to chant. They're hired mercenaries to create violence, destroy public and private property. And yet they don't even have the guts or the objective facts or the intelligence to really sit down and debate and say why they're doing this. Because so many of them, again, are hired mercenaries. So many of them are very young people who think they know it all. And let me tell you something. I was looking for this article. I mentioned this in a couple of news shows a few weeks ago. It was an article I read a couple of years ago, and so many things are being purged. We're in the book-burning era of America right now. But this article, I'll make a long story short, it was a 900-to-1 ratio. Most young people are on the liberal side. In other words, they lean to the left. 900-to-1 ratio of people who start liberal and turn conservative as they get older versus 1 out of 900 that starts conservative and goes liberal. So whether it be maturity, whether it be information, whether it be the fact that the mainstream media has manufactured perception, guilt, pity, or ideology, and they've turned too many people into followers and not thinkers anymore. Whatever it is, when a lot of these young people that I see on the news who are destroying property, creating violence, most of them are very young. And I'm just saying, especially in today's era of videos, you could really harm your future by doing things or saying things that you're not informed about. So I just want to mention that Lewis and Clark analogy.
Now,
Rich,
I don't remember ever hearing or reading it from anyone on our team who was not happy with what Barack Obama was doing during his regime, going over and hacking a McDonald's website to convey the message of how bad of a president or CEO we thought he was. Our team doesn't do that kind of thing, but the other team does, and that's what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, there's a lot of hypocrisy. I think we're all tired of hearing the words hypocrisy and double standards by people on the so-called left. Now keep in mind, folks, this is not, and I was going to talk about this also, this is not a left-right paradigm. It's only a left-right paradigm at the very bottom levels, the low information levels. When you say, aren't you tired of hearing, no, it's big government's fault, no, it's big corporations' fault, that's not the case. It's a combination. It's an alliance. It's in the bed. They've basically combined sources because that's what we have, a fascist system right now. So when you see all these, idiot young people saying Trump's a fascist, he's doing exactly the opposite. He wants to have free speech. That's what Hitler did. Hitler got rid of free speech. Hitler did everything to take people's guns away. People don't understand that fascism is the alliance of big government, big corporations, the court system. Let me give you an example here, okay? Here's an article. U.S. media blackout. Italian courts rules vaccines cause autism. It was about a GlaxoSmithKline product. Now, U.S. media blackout. Think about that, guys. Didn't hit the media because it's an example of fascism. When the courts, big government, and big corporations watch each other's back, the information doesn't get out. And there was a follow-up article to this that also didn't get out to the United States. GlaxoSmithKline is paying out $63 million to vaccine victims. This is what we're dealing with, America. This is why we need to read research and call a spade a spade. Now, if the left is so liberal, how come Obamacare and all social programs don't get paid from the top down? They just get governed from the top down. Why don't the top 1%? Why don't the American people say how much money someone can have and then just say all social programs get paid from the top and they don't hurt the middle class? Remember, 8 people have the same net worth as half the world.
Rich Scheben will be back right after these few short commercial announcements. And Kyle in Montana, you are up next. Rich Scheben's with us. And we're talking about the middle class. And Rich, I want to share something with you. We talked about groups. And there's a highly successful group in the Ozarks. And they belong to a church. And the church is called the James River Church. How many people go to this? Well, it started a few years ago. It began in 1990 with 4 families. 4 families, 1990. And now they hit a record of 16,000 people weekly in this church. I've been to the church. And this church has 3,500 seats, and they're like theater seats. So if you go sit in this church, you are very comfortable. And of course, it's so large that you can't see the preacher, but that's okay. There's multiple screens where you can look up and see the activities that are going on stage on these great big screens in the church. And if you miss services, you'll get a reminder. Very interesting. So the reason I'm mentioning this is that if you want to get along and you want to be prosperous and if you want the system to work for you, you just become a member of that church. Kyle in Montana, welcome.
Yeah, good morning, gentlemen. Good morning, Rich. Sorry about that. But anyway, you really hit a button and when you was talking about the other side. And I think the problem is this, the white male in this country really just wants to be left alone. We want to be able to pursue on an equal footing, equal basis with everybody, let the chips fall where they lie. We're willing to take the ups and downs of life and the successes and failures based upon, most of the time, across the board, based upon our own merit or lack thereof. But the other side, they don't. They want it for free. You go to any minority, liberals, you can lump them all in one great big group, but they want it for free. They want to just create money out of thin air, let everybody live in a utopia without having to work for it or live up to it, any kind of a standard. And I think the problem is, Rich, that the white males in this country have not realized yet, but we are in a full-blown war. And if we don't wake up quick, we're going to be sitting there with our guts out. My dad, when he was in Korea, that was one of his sayings, because he went into a lot of hand-to-hand combat, and he said, Americans wake up when their guts are out.
Mm-hmm. And you know what? And Kyle, thanks for the question or the statement. And I always appreciate it when you come on when I'm on Vince's show. It shows you're a diehard listener. And I agree with what you just said. At the same time, it's also a disguise. The so-called utopia they say they're fighting for is, again, double standards and hypocrisy. What they're doing, and pardon my redundancy, is they're trying to create chaos, infighting, and division. At the same time, they're disrespecting all the groups that are demanding the bars of standards and expectations to be lowered. That's why I gave the Tom Brady, Belichick analogy. They are insulting the work ethic, ability, and intelligence of these groups. And then their own country, which they're globalists, they don't care about America, they're not nationalists. They care about basically governing everything from top-down, centralized control with no accountability. So when you stab your own country in the back regarding innovation, ingenuity, knowledge, technique, everything that made us great, there's only one way to go, and that's basically descending. And unfortunately, that's what's happening.
Kyle, did you want to hold through the break?
Oh, sure. Well, no, I'll let you go. I'll just listen more. Is Rich going to be on for next hour, too?
Yeah, he is. He is. And Kyle is an instructor at USA Prepares.
Right. Yeah, Kyle's been to my cabin here.
Okay, Kyle, thanks so much.
Thanks, Kyle. You're a good man.
We'll be right back after top of the hour news and commercial announcements. Rich Sheben's with us. Everyone all set? Cocked? Locked? Here we go. Hour number 2 of USA Prepares. John Harmon, Program Director of Genesis Communications Network, is engineering the broadcast. I am Vincent Finelli. Rich Sheben's with us. Rich, we're talking about the mainstream media and managing. Their job seems to be managing perception. I wanted to share this little story with you. Back in the the late 1990s, I attended a convention. It was a preparedness convention. And there were a lot of people there who are the age of Mrs. Finelli and our children and me. And so there was one guy. There was one guy that looked different from everybody else. He looked like he was a member of Hell's Angels. Had the physical appearance, the long hair, the tassels, the boots, the belt, the image of Hell's Angels. He's the only one that looked like that. And the television camera zoomed right in on him, and they interviewed him. Completely different from everybody else. So Mrs. Finelli and I talked about it, and I decided I would go there and talk to the television cameras. And after they were done interviewing this man, I said, this person's different looking from everybody else. Why don't you interview some of the rest of the people here? And so the talent guy, the guy who was the face of this TV broadcast or news item, said, okay, we'll interview you. And I said, okay, that would be fine, except I have 3 requirements. Number 1, I would like a copy of all the footage that you shoot of me. Number 2, I would like your business card. And 3, I would like a copy of the final piece that you use with me in it. Those 3 things, and we're good to go. No deal. He wouldn't do it. And the reason, I believe, is what you talked about on your website. Words are being changed. And I don't mean that they would physically change my words per se. What I mean is I think there was a possibility or the potential for them to ask a question and then splice in an answer from me to possibly a different question, or rephrase the question and then have me answer that rephrased question, but splicing in audio that wasn't there, or piecing it together to make it seem like I was saying something I wasn't saying. That was my concern, and that's why I didn't do it. And the reason I know that that's possible, and back even in the 1990s, was because on 1993, there was a piece that was done on the NBC Today show about really interesting technology in elementary schools in Virginia. And it was a featured piece on what I was doing with my team in 1993. And I saw how they did it with one camera. They would have 2 people sitting together facing each other, and the camera would be faced on, aimed at one person, and questions would be asked. So you'd hear the question on the audio, but you'd see the response from me. And then the camera was separately turned on the person asking the questions, and the video was shot of that. So they pieced all these little parts together and made it seem like it was almost live, but it wasn't. It was staged. I saw them do it. I was there. I was in the seat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, Vince, I'm pretty sure you know this because we've had a lot of backroom conversations and stuff, but I've been approached probably over the years by about 40 different production companies who want to do reality shows or documentaries on me and my lifestyle. I've turned them all down, long story short, because I wanted final editing rights. They wanted to script certain things, have me say certain things, have me not say certain things. And I refused. You know, the money was pretty much non-existent. They were basically selling on they're going to make me famous or infamous or, you know, and that goes back to the earlier part of the show where we need to stand for principle and not paychecks and not do it for fame or infamy and do it for our country. And that's where we are. And too many people are taking the bait on fame or to be infamous and or doing it for the money, and that's all for the wrong reasons. You know, even making a living should be secondary. When GlaxoSmithKline told me to stop asking for a part-time job share, I said no. I had managers coming from all over the country calling me on the phone. People I didn't even know saying, "Rich, stop asking for it. I understand you're standing for principle and you're standing for the law, but you got to stop doing it." I said no. So they tried to push me out the door, and actually a competing company hired me as the first male job share. 3 years into that, they made me take objective tests, and my spinal stenosis, nerve damage, and muscular atrophy came out. And they just said, drive your company car home, you're done. And that's the liability paranoia that we live in. But that's, I regress. Let me go into a few more things, Vince, if that's okay with you, on what's happening with this country that's affecting the middle class. But first I want to talk about a real quick analogy on what's happening regarding the laws, the fact that we are lowering the bars of standards and expectations. Now, this is a hypothetical situation. No one get their panties in a bunch here, but I'm just going to give an example of parents and foster care. Okay, this is just an analogy. I'm making this up. Okay, that's my disclaimer. Okay, let's say the first set of parents had, now, I'll mention real quick, and I know I've mentioned this on your show before, Dr. Ben Carson came to Northwest Montana a few years ago and said the first words out of his mouth was, "I hate political correctness." Right after that, he said, when you're politically correct, you turn minorities into victims. Now, hold on to that thought, folks. So let's say the first set of parents who were trying to get these kids for foster care had some type of protectionist group status or victim group status. Let's say they were both divorced 3 times. Let's say they were extremely obese. They didn't have a high work ethic for exercise or nutrition. Let's say they were alcoholic and drug addicts. I'm making this up, folks. Don't get your hackles up. Let's say they never had a real private sector job. Let's say they never paid taxes. Let's say they had 5 felonies apiece. And let's say the other couple was perfect. Now, nobody's perfect. This is a hypothetical situation. Let's say they were fit. They'd never been arrested. They were out of debt. They knew the fine line between needs and wants, et cetera, et cetera. Now, let's say parents number letter A, the first description I gave, received the kids. This is why it's analogous to the news that just came out today about a judge wants Trump to double the amount of 50,000 refugees inflow. Okay, we are sick at home, folks. Our middle class, our bottom 93% are sick. And what I mean sick means that we have to fix things at home first. In a real-world scenario that makes common sense and logic, if a judge brings in anybody, whether they're criminals or good citizens, if anybody does any crime, that judge should be accountable for it. They should have to pay for it, not the bottom 93%, but that's not what happens. The bottom 93% gets everything compromised about their lifestyle, their savings, their pensions, everything gets compromised, but not the elite who make the rules. We need to start taking care of our young, our old, our vets. We're paying for tens of millions of illegal immigrants. I have nothing against immigrants. I have nothing against anybody. But we have to go around first base and second base before we cross home plate. We have to put things in the right order. We're living in this giant psyop where the power that be, the elites, want to distract, dumb down, and divide us. Now look at some of these headlines here. Obama stole $200 billion from Fannie and Freddie so he can keep his Obamacare afloat. Stole from poor families, private investors who wanted to invest in Fannie and Freddie. Okay? Basically, they just propped up insurance companies to save the elite, the fascist system we have. And when I say fascist, it's by definition, only 4 to 6% of Americans, folks, make the primary income from being self-employed. It's the big corporate oligarchies and the combination or alliance of big government and the court system protecting everybody in that system. So the bottom 93% is being, stabbed in the back. Mike Huckabee recently said that Obama's DOJ, Department of Justice, was funding anti-American globalist groups. Loretta Lynch met with Bill Clinton. Loretta Lynch just came on Facebook and said we need more marches and blood and death on the streets. Okay? This is our last Attorney General. This is America. This is reality. 20th Century Fox just got caught creating fake websites and fake news. In other words, to create more subliminal messaging, more propaganda, more professional wordsmithing, more Hegelian dialectic. Okay? It's all about the theater, the drama, the veil, the controversy, swaying public opinion. Again, 6 corporations. It's probably down to 4 now. You got to follow the money. You got to look at who owns these corporations. Amazon gets $600 million contract with the CIA. Amazon was blocking links to WikiLeaks. Obama wiretapping Trump Tower, whether they're using the NSA, CIA, the FBI, or British intelligence sources. I don't know if they can put their finger on this, but people, when we talk about the left, don't let the ideology fool you. It's manufactured. It's a bunch of globalists and billionaire donors who are swaying public opinion for the addiction of power, money, and control. Addiction, just like the meth addict on the street, folks.
Rich, when we come back, I'll tell you a short story about how the government, came down on me. Interesting story. They threatened me. We'll be right back. Rich Sheben's with us, offgridmontana.com. So, Rich, politicians expect and demand respect. And I believe that most are unconvicted criminals at some level. Petty larceny, bribery, extortion, grand larceny, and character assassination. Now, I was told this by a high-ranking member of the Missouri state government. And here's what he said. And we're talking about managing perception and dirty tricks. So here's how it goes. So the Republicans are listening to the radio and they find out that the radio personality is interviewing the Democrat candidate about views, positions, and so forth. And it's going well. So the Republicans get one of their minions to call into the radio station, and it goes something like this. I really, thank you for taking my call. I really like some of the things that you're saying. Your position on such and such, I can kind of agree with that. And then the candidate, the Democrat, says, thank you so much, appreciate it. And then the caller says, I was just wondering, are those pedophilia charges, are they still pending? That's character assassination. That is what I was told by a Republican that they do to Democrats. Now, I'm not saying Democrats are good and Republicans are bad. I think they're both evil. However, dirty tricks are played on both sides. And so here's another story. The same politician demanded that I shut down USA Prepares, that I shut down the meetups, the expos, the radio broadcasts, the website, everything that we do. Just shut it all down. And to entice me to do that, he leveled a threat directly at me. And he said, I will call a press conference and expose you, Vincent Finelli, as an anti-Semite, an anti-Zionist, someone who believes in UFOs and aliens, and I would call this press conference with over 60 media outlets invited to attend the press conference. That's newspaper, radio, television, every way you can think of in the Ozark Mountains. And I said, well, some of that's true. I actually am interested in UFOs and aliens because I don't know much about them, just what I read, but I'd like to know more. The rest of it is not true. And go ahead, do it. And you know what? He backed down. So what I'm saying, Rich Sheben, is when you combine business, the bribing, the buying of politicians, who I believe most are corrupt, and government, corporations, government, combine them together, that's a formidable force that is attacking us at every angle, 360 degrees around us. I'm concerned about it, as are you. But I've felt the threats. We here at USA Prepares, believe it or not, are under constant threats of being sued, governments demanding all kinds of money from us that they don't deserve in large quantities. I mean, think of it like this. They would like to tax our family more than 100% of revenue. Imagine that. I'm just talking about sales tax. We don't do much, but they're coming after us. We'll be right back. Rich Sheben's with us, offgridmontana.com, offgridmontana.com. Rich?
And let me just address what you just mentioned regarding censorship and surveillance and everything that's going on in this country. That's why the New York Assemblyman wants to get rid of free speech that's not government approved, David Weprin. This is the world that we live in. For those of you who are listening to this broadcast and you want to share it with other people, I do it quick because if you're not hearing it live, and even live, you got to question with the technology that they have today. I've seen software when people are on TV, they can literally change their expressions live. They've had technology, folks, for 10 years that they can take my voice and, just like I mentioned earlier, They can change things that I say audibly with my voice. I don't even know in good conscience if I can tell people to buy my book anymore, Vince, because I have a book here, a hard copy. They're coming in left and right from Amazon and Lightning Source, who's my printer. And the first chapter, introductory chapter, is being deleted. The table of contents are being deleted. If you buy an ebook, who knows what you're getting? Who knows what's been deleted and what's been added? Because of this censorship, surveillance, book burning era that we live in. This is what we have.
I've got
today.
a comment.
Again, sure.
I've got a comment about that. Back in the 1990s, I was a consultant for the school systems. And they were really interested, and I've mentioned this before, they're really interested in all this technology. The more computers you had, the better your school system seemed to stand in comparison with the other school systems in the state. And I'm talking about specifically the Commonwealth of Virginia. Well, we had plenty of computers, but the teachers, some of the teachers thought, we could, and the administration thought we could really supplement with a learning software from these large companies. And the source would be one point, let's say California, and what we would do is we would be on the internet or we would download the latest version of history, science, math, whatever we were studying, all of it. And we could actually replace some of the teachers with this. And the point that I tried to make is all you have to do is change history in one place, and it now is distributed across the country just by changing, one or two or three points in history. Just change what happened. And I was very concerned about that. And I said, what's the problem? And they said, well, the cost of books. And they're saying that the cost of printed books is so expensive, but we can replace this with software that'll do the same thing. And it's not true. It won't do the same thing. It can't stand the test of time. The test of time is if you open a book today and you put it on the bookshelf and you open it next week, it's the same book, unless somebody rips pages out. So that was a tremendous concern to me. And I fought to protect books from being thrown overboard by the school systems. But remember, I'm not an educator. I'm just a consultant, a computer guy, saying that here's what could happen. So you're absolutely right. It's a really slippery slope. And I think it's great to have computer technology, but we can't depend on it completely. Because what I just said could happen.
Everything's being hacked. And that's one of the reasons why I'm not a big cryptocurrency proponent, is because even if it's not hacked now, it will be hacked tomorrow. And especially if these big banks or somebody gets behind a Bitcoin or big corrupt government, and that's another tool to eliminate the middle class. They can just say, oh, we've been hacked, we're done for a month, and everybody goes broke, and the elite buys everything for pennies on the dollar. And I can go into much detail on that, but
and that's happened.
Let me stick to what I was saying because, sorry?
That has happened in the past.
Absolutely.
The markets have been manipulated. Those who have wealth can release rumors, drive down prices. We even heard one of those guys on one of those financial programs, Kramer. There was a video on YouTube about that and how he was involved in manipulating stock prices. And he and his cronies, if I remember this correctly, what he talked about was they would call the trading desk and they'd say, hey, I understand, and the example would be like Apple or some big company like that. I hear they're going to miss that product delivery date. Is that true? And then another guy would call another person on the trading floor. Is that, I just heard this about Apple. What do you think? Could it be true? And another guy. And pretty soon after 6 phone calls to the trading floor, there was this massive rumor that Apple's going to miss, the share price would fall, the stock could be gobbled up at lower prices, and then it was, well, that rumor's not true. Apple just delivered. Price shoots back up. That's how it can be done.
Yeah, it's just like the kindergarten analogy of the game telephone. Remember when they put us in a semicircle? The teacher would tell a rumor to the first kid, and by the time it goes through, it's totally distorted. And that's what they do to individuals. They demonize and discredit the messenger, because the machine is so powerful. But they're not just computers, and the elite are not just changing and rewriting history. They're normalizing the future. And you mentioned pedophilia earlier in the show. And, you got Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I read an article on her that she wants to normalize it and legalize it. And salons coming out with that. There's a lot of, how many thousands of arrests has been since Trump got on board by the Pizzagate, pedophilia, whatever you want to call it. And the mainstream media has ignored it. So for all of you ideologues who think you're on the left and think that the left is liberal and not globalist takeover, and you have children or nieces or nephews, or you just see a young innocent boy and girl playing in their yard, and think about what's happening to these kids. A lot of them are being sacrificed and killed. And the mainstream media that you glorify is not saying anything about the thousands of these kids being abused and killed. And yet you get all pissed off because Trump says the word pussy. Please. Project Veritas just came out with a video that showed the teachers union defending raping kids by knife point to the throat. I'm not making this up. They're also normalizing, I see, with the way a lot of women are being treated. Now, regarding sex, most people, I've had a lot of conversations in back rooms and in front of hundreds of people with people. Americans are not unreasonable. They care about two things regarding sex. The first thing is adult, mutual, consensual sex. Okay? Adult, no raping, no beating, no blindfolding, no tying up, no, adult, mutual, consensual sex. And the second thing people expect is two people to go in a room, do whatever they're going to do, keep their mouth shut, and they'll come out and say, oh, I'm heterosexual, or I'm homosexual, or I'm trans this, or I'm trans that, or I'm this, or I'm... People just, all they say is, you're going to do something, it's private, keep it private, and that's all they expect, are those two things. But the normalization of what's going on, you could see it in the Oval Office when Kellyanne Conway was sitting on her knees on a sofa. The Democrat congressman was saying, hey, that's a familiar look with Kellyanne being on her knees. The normalization of the way kids and women are going to be treated by the elite. Now, for you feminists out there, it's amazing how quiet they were. Now, here's my disclaimer when I say the word feminist. I'm not saying all women. I realize that only 14 to 18% of women consider themselves feminists. But going back to my talk about standing for principle, we're all imperfect sinners. I get that. Okay? Every one of us. But when you lower the bars of standards and expectations, this is what you get. You get inconsistencies, you get people screaming hypocrisy, double standards, and this is why I always talk about practice what you preach laws. Now, Vince, I realize there's not a lot of time left. I was hoping to talk a lot about the economy, and if it's okay with you, maybe I'll just shoot a few things out there just in the last few minutes, and I'll leave it up to you since it is your show.
Well, go ahead, Rich. Go ahead.
Okay. Thanks, buddy. One of the things, because the bottom 93% is losing a lot of ground, I really recommend that a lot of people look into decentralizing. What I mean by that is, back in the so-called Great Depression, a lot of people, even in Montana, poor people didn't even know there was one because they raised animals, they hunted, they fished, they grew gardens, they lived below their means, they knew the fine line between needs and wants, they didn't buy things on time, they just kept their life simple. Well, 90% of people live in urban, suburban America. Only 10% live rural today. What if we had an economic or financial collapse, an EMP, wars? There's so many things, famines, that could happen. And we're teaching our children, and not just children, even middle-aged people, how to push buttons, manage paper, and be politically correct. They're losing their edge. They're losing skill sets. So that's one thing that I'd like to recommend, and to prove that it truly is not a left-right paradigm and truly is the aristocracy versus the serfs. I just want to mention something I read a week or two ago that all minimum wage people combined earned in this country somewhere around $14 billion. All minimum wage combined. Wall Street bonuses. This is not regular salaries or regular compensation. Wall Street bonuses was almost $30 billion, more than double. So 7 years after the bottom 93% bailed out the too big to fail, too big to jails, the insurance companies, the Wall Street, the big banks, they are getting bonuses that more than double the hardworking people in this country. You still want to think there's a left-right paradigm? You still want to say Democrat, Republican? You're being fooled.
Couldn't agree more. The rest of us are being asked to sacrifice, and prices are going up. The currency is being worth less, and yet there's those who are getting millions and millions in bonuses. It's unacceptable. We'll be right back. Off-Grid Montana. Rich Scheben. offgridmontana.com. And his book, One New York Man's Journey to Off-Grid Living in Montana. Rich Scheben lives off the grid, literally. Hunts, fishes, grows his own food, does everything he can to be independent and self-sufficient. Rich, please continue.
Well, thank you, sir. And we know when I talk about the top 7% versus the bottom 93% of the top 0.7% that controls everything, this has nothing to do with class envy, because the great majority of these people receive their money through corruption, manipulation, nepotism, and the thousands of subsets or veils or disguises under political correctness. It's not legit. And a great example is when all the bank bailouts occurred that the middle class paid for. The top 1% received 95% of the money. So what we have forming in America, or has formed, is what I call an incognito caste system, similar to India. Not as deliberate, not as open, not as obvious, but it's definitely not a left-right paradigm. That's what they want you to think at the low information levels. It's getting to the point where, unless you're this great athlete or you're born in money, it's going to be almost impossible to succeed. Even corporations these days, they're getting away from their core businesses. They're the trading, the financial counseling. Everything's fixed. Everything's phony. Every number and book is cooked. Trump is getting a GDP to debt ratio of 106%, where Regan was like 30. Even don't let these terms like populism. Okay, this is all professional wordsmithing. Basically, it's an establishment term. What it means for the bottom 93% is that we want to be able to control our own destiny. Okay? The Fed looks at the soft data, the surveys, the consumer confidence. Basically, it was almost like focus group subjective emotional opinion from the elite, so it doesn't benefit whatever they do, the 93. In fact, this Keynesian economic, not that Austrian is perfect, but this Keynesian economic theory is basically, let's just print money, press buttons, and pick the winners and losers, and everybody else loses ground. Because when inflation occurs, and we're not in an inflationary period, we're in a stagflationary period, which is the worst for the middle class. It's basically means prices are rising while everything else is going into the crapper regarding the economy. The GDP forecast for quarter one by the Fed was 0.9%. 0.9. And yet Yellen's raising interest rates like a drunken sailor in a bar. We're running off of debt, we're running off of credit, and we're running off of subsidies. Real wages are down, retail sales are down, malls are down. We're living in this age of austerity. And look what's happening in the EU. Look at all these poor countries, like Greece and Portugal and Italy and Spain and Ireland. I don't know if the EU is going to survive, but if they do, they're probably going to just dump these countries after bleeding them dry. Whether it be the IMF or central banks in general, they're all economic hitmen to benefit the lifestyle of the elite. and everybody else is collateral damage. And all these countries that I just mentioned, for years and generations to come, they're probably going to be in depression. This is why the elite always wants wars, because it masks the symptoms of the corrupt monetary policies that they've done. Our GDP is 60 to 70% dependent on consumer spending. So everything's on the chopping block, folks. Your equity in your homes, whatever you save, anything that's secure, your culture, middle class, nothing's left. For the bottom 93%, we have to read, research, and pick up a microphone and share information. And I want to mention something that's very important for the bottom 93%. Increased GDP does not equate to happiness. If we were in a true non-corrupt, non-manipulated supply and demand free market system, it would be different. But we are exactly the opposite. Now, interest rates, they went up not from Trump, but from Brexit. It's an indirect warning. It's a war on the bottom 93% that you better let the elite run the show. And this is why we need to educate ourselves, folks.